C-SPAN, your primary source for campaign 2018. Now a debate in the U.S. Senate race in North Dakota between Democratic incumbent Senator Heidi Heitkamp and Republican U.S. Congressman Kevin Cramer. This debate is an hour.
Good evening, and welcome to Bismarck State College for tonight's U.S. Senate debate, sponsored by the North Dakota Newspaper Association. Tonight's event also is sponsored by the American Cancer Society Action Network, Forum Communications Company, and Bismarck Schools Career Academy. I'm Corey Wenzel, publisher of the Grand Forks Herald and Prairie Business Magazine. Joining me on the panel tonight are Steve Wagner, Director of Content for Forum Communications, Cecile Werman of Journal Publishing in Crosby and Tioga, North Dakota, and Owen Peel, editor of The Courier, the student newspaper at Mandan, North Dakota High School. These panelists have crafted tonight's questions, and they'll take turns reading them. Both candidates were provided advance notice of the rules and have agreed to them. Here are those rules. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks. The order for opening remarks, as well as closing remarks, was drawn shortly before we took the stage tonight. Following opening remarks, we'll begin with the series of questions. The candidates will take turns answering first, with answers limited to 1 minute. One candidate will answer first, followed by the other. The first candidate will then have 30 seconds to respond. At 15 seconds until the end, I'll raise the red card. When I place it down, the time is up. This will continue for the hour we have allotted here tonight. After approximately 50 minutes, the candidates each will ask one question following the same format. We'll then end with closing remarks to last 2 minutes each. The panelists will ask the questions, and my role will be to moderate, to time, and to generally maintain the flow of the event. Before we start, I urge the candidates to please adhere to the time limits to which we've all agreed. I also urge the audience to refrain from remarks or cheers or jeers. We've all come to hear what these two have to say as this important election nears, so please, let's politely keep the focus on the candidates. Prior to starting, I'd like to thank Bismarck State College for allowing us to use this facility, as well as the North Dakota Newspaper Association for organizing this debate. Tonight, we bring together two functions of society that are of the utmost importance to America: politics and, yes, the media. Neither profession is perfect, yet neither is as sinister or flawed as some insist. I believe both are a calling, and I believe good people enter these pursuits with a passion and a sincere desire to inform, to lead, and to make North Dakota and the nation a good place to be. Our candidates are good people, and they have faithfully served North Dakota. Kevin Cramer, a Republican, has represented North Dakota in the U.S. House of Representatives since 2013. Prior to serving in federal office, he was chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party. He served as state tourism director, served as state economic development and finance director, and served on the State Public Service Commission. He's a native of Kindred, North Dakota, and has degrees from Concordia College in Moorhead and the University of Mary. Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat, has represented North Dakota in the U.S. Senate since 2013. Prior to serving in federal office, she served from 1992 to 2000 as North Dakota's Attorney General, and prior to that, she was North Dakota's Tax Commissioner. She's a native of Mantador, North Dakota, and has degrees from the University of North Dakota and Lewis and Clark Law School. Now, we'll begin with opening comments to last 2 minutes apiece, and it begins with Senator Heitkamp.
First off, I want to thank everyone in the Newspaper Association. This is such a great tradition that you have, and it's one of my very many Newspaper Association debates. I want to thank also everyone watching and everyone in the audience. I think this is the way politics should be. It should be us gathering, debating back and forth, talking about the issues so that people can see the differences and people can see the similarities in our positions. I want to start by saying that I always want to be a senator that North Dakota can be proud of. Unfortunately, this week, I not only disappointed many North Dakotans, I disappointed myself. My campaign wrongly listed many names in a campaign ad that were not authorized and were inappropriate. I can only say this is a terrible mistake. And the last thing I would ever want to do would be to cause trauma for any victim of violence. My parents taught me that if I made a mistake, my obligation was to take responsibility and then to try and make things right. I don't know that I could ever expect that these women would accept my apology, nor am I asking them to accept my apology. But I am praying for guidance and forgiveness as we move forward. For the young people in the audience, I want you to know that you can make a very big mistake on a very big stage, and you can take two paths. You can let it fester and continue to cause injury to the people you hurt, or you can begin a new chapter. You can take that next step forward. And so it doesn't have to be an end. It can, in fact, be that next step. Now, I have an obligation to redouble my efforts, to regain the support and regain the trust of North Dakota citizens and hopefully their votes. I want so much to get back to work for the state. I think that we have done so much in the last 6 years, and I want to continue that work. But I cannot begin this debate without acknowledging this grave and horrible error.
Congressman, you'll have 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
All right. Thank you very much, Corey, and to the panel, to the North Dakota Newspaper Association for hosting this rich and very important tradition, as Senator Heitkamp said. And also thanks to all of you for what is the irrevocable gift of your time tonight. And those of you watching on TV or who may watch this online or later, perhaps a recording of it, thank you as well. Obviously, freedom only works when the free people exercise that liberty in the most fundamental way. And the most fundamental way, of course, is at the ballot box. And the best way to do that, of course, is to study the issues and study those that would ask for your trust. And tonight, Senator Heitkamp and I are going to do that in this form, in this appropriate traditional form of a debate. You know, Senator Heitkamp and I were elected on the very same day by the very same people 6 years ago. And probably the greatest opportunity for North Dakota voters is that they get to compare the two of us, not just in rhetoric, not just in even vision or promises, but they get to compare us based on 6 years serving the same people in the same Congresses and voting on many of the very same bills. What a treasure that is. Oftentimes, you don't have that opportunity in politics. This time you do. So tonight we get to square off and discuss our accomplishments, discuss our records as well as our visions for the future. And I look forward to the opportunity and thank you for it.
Our first question, Congressman Cramer, you will go first. Steve.
If elected, will you support or oppose any bills that allow insurers to deny coverage or charge higher premiums to people with pre-existing conditions, reinstitute lifetime or annual caps, or weaken benefits such as coverage for prescription drugs?
I would not, and I have not. Now, obviously, this is a great debate that's going on. I've had the opportunity. First of all, let's admit something. Obamacare has been an unmitigated disaster for this country, and especially for North Dakota. We have the same number of uninsured today in North Dakota as we had before Obamacare. The difference is that the uninsured today are the young, healthy people who can't afford to have insurance, and we need them in the marketplace. We need them in the risk pool to help bring down the costs, and we need to have the appropriate incentives to keep them in the pool. With regard to pre-existing conditions, this was a failure prior to Obamacare. It's why it's one of the two most popular items in Obamacare that everybody that I know, that I work with, has pledged to maintain. I'm done.
Just a reminder, when I raise it, it means we're at 15 seconds left.
Okay.
And Senator.
Thank you for the question. The answer is no. When I ran 6 years ago, I said about the health care law, there's good and bad. Let's keep the good, get rid of the bad. The good are exactly those provisions, and I would add one more, which is expansion of Medicaid. It is an incorrect statement for Congressman Cramer to say he has not ever voted for a bill that would eliminate the federal protections for pre-existing conditions and all the things you listed. He voted 5 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which clearly he disagrees with. That's his prerogative. When asked if he would, why he didn't offer a replacement, Congressman Cramer said, because those were basically symbolic votes, not important. It is so important that we not look at our health care symbolically, that we make sure that our plans stay affordable, but we also have these patient protections moving forward. And so as we begin the discussion on health care, we have to remember that these patient protections are critical to the life of so many North Dakotans.
Thank you. Congressman, 30 seconds.
So Obamacare kicked several people off. In fact, Obamacare has a loophole that allows states and insurance companies to throw people off the first time they miss a payment, so that they can drive them to the Obamacare exchanges where the prices are $1,500 for a young couple with children who can't afford to pay the premiums. Let me read the Republican bill that I voted for. Section 137. Nothing in this act shall be construed as permitting health insurance issuers to limit access to health coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions. Unambiguous.
Okay. Question 2 from Cecile. Senator, you'll answer first.
Years of work by farmers, farm service groups, and state governments have gone into developing international markets for the agricultural products grown in North Dakota. What will you do to assist farmers impacted by tariffs and trade wars to restore those markets?
Fight, fight, fight for our farmers. This is a huge difference between Congressman Cramer and myself. From the very beginning, I could see that these tariffs were going to have a very dramatic and negative effect on North Dakota farmers. That's why I immediately went and said, we cannot do this. I talked to Robert Lighthizer. I talked to the Secretary of Agriculture. I have been, I used to say I'm the chief bitcher about these tariffs because they are so wrong for North Dakota. We spent 30 years building a market. We're going to lose it in a year. We have to not only grow other markets because we found we're too dependent on China, but we have to recognize that if we're not trading internationally in North Dakota, our ag products, we will not be successful on the farm. These tariffs are going to decimate a very critical and important market for one of our most important cash crops, soybeans.
Thank you.
All right, so way back in March when there was first talk of this, I wrote to the Secretary of Agriculture, asked him to come up with a mitigation plan should a long-term trade war come back on farmers so that we could have a mitigation plan to get through the short term. He did that, and those payments have gone out the first half. I also attended and testified, the only member of Congress from North Dakota to testify not once but twice at USTR hearings. And I'll tell you one thing I haven't done. I haven't stood with China against our farmers. I haven't stood with Canada against our farmers. I haven't stood with Mexico against our farmers. When our president picks the tools that he's going to use, I think we're obligated to stand with the United States of America. The best way to end a trade war quickly is to be unified on our side, not on the other side. That's why I'm so grateful that 88% of North Dakota's export markets, Canada and Mexico, have a new deal. That South Korea, we have a new deal. That this week alone, USTR has notified Congress of a new negotiation with Japan, European Union, United Kingdom. And I'm glad there are 2 ships of U.S. soybeans on their way right now to China.
Thank you.
Congressman Cramer is a little late on the news. I can tell you that the EU right now is pulling out of the deal, and the deal with Japan won't include agricultural products. So let's not overstate what is actually happening here. In fact, Congressman Cramer almost blew the one provision that was critical in the new NAFTA, which was the grain grading provision, by speaking very rudely about our Canadian neighbors. We have to bring diplomacy. We have to bring the right kind of trade authority. And let me tell you, this trade policy, I don't care what anyone says, is going to decimate our foreign markets for the long term if we aren't careful and if we're not fighting back. And if we can't
Senator,
fight for...
I'm sorry. Thank you. Question number 3 from Owen. And Congressman Cramer, you'll go first.
When I go to school, do I need to worry about my safety? Are North Dakota schools properly and sufficiently protected? And if not, how can they be better protected?
Well, you'd probably know the answer to that better than I would, Owen, since you're going to school here, and it seems to me that you're probably talking about some state law issues. I think that I don't know how safe you are at your school, Owen, I'm not even sure, do you go to Mandan? Is that where you go? I think that it is really imperative that we have this community discussion, community, state, as well as federal discussion about what is the appropriate way to protect kids at school. It's not enough to just have this high-level discussion. There are some very practical things I think we should do, but I think it's got to be up to the local culture. I think every community, every state's a little different. Whether or not you allow, for example, teachers to carry firearm, that may be different in New York than it is in Mandan, for example. Whether you have armed guards in uniform or police officers, that, I think that's a viable option. I hate to see us over-armed, obviously, in schools, because we want a sense of freedom and a sense of safety, as well as, of course, being safe. So I think this is a community discussion, and I applaud you for bringing it up.
When I was Attorney General, the Columbine shooting happened, and I was tasked by the National Association of Attorneys General to try and figure out how we could do better. And we wrote a set of rules. And when those rules were followed in Sandy Hook, I realized those rules were too anemic and absolutely did not protect. So we need to harden our structures, which means we need to have entry points and we need to protect the building. But we also need resource officers in our schools. And I know it's easier for Mandan to do it. It's easier for our Class A schools. We need to expand those resource officers through federal funding to our Class B schools and to our Native American schools. We need people who are trained using firearms to be on site to protect our kids. And we need to stop bullying, and we need to take all the preventative measures that we can so that we have a much more civil society in our high schools. And we need to understand and listen when we know there are young people who are troubled, who in fact could create, who could act in a way that could jeopardize the lives of many, many of your classmates.
Thank you. Oh, and I think Senator Heitkamp raises an important point about having trained, armed personnel. I'm not sure that we should be looking to the federal government to fund that. There's no end to the good things that the federal government can fund, and we're blessed in North Dakota to have a whole bunch of well-trained people with firearms. I'm counting on some of you being here tonight, so thank you very much. With that, I think, again, you're seeing a good discussion. I think you've initiated a good community discussion, but not one size does not fit all.
A question from Steve, and Senator Heitkamp, you'll begin.
Do you believe the investigation into election interference by Russia is rigged, and how concerned are you about the possibility that foreign governments are attacking our election machinery? If so, what needs to be done to prevent future attacks?
I do not think that the investigation is rigged. And I want to say something about Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller, who is conducting this investigation, is a patriot. He's a veteran. 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam. When he didn't need to go to Vietnam, he could have taken a student deferment, and 1 Bronze Star. He came home, took off that uniform, and became our FBI director during one of the most difficult times. I trust Robert Mueller to get to the bottom of it. A Republican appointee, head of the FBI. Robert Mueller has a job to do, and that job is to find out what happened so we can prevent this from happening again. Interference with our election, we know it happens, and it's going to happen again unless we take every method possible to prevent it.
I've never felt like the Mueller investigation or the investigation into the role of Russia's interference was ever rigged. I, too, have some faith in Robert Mueller. I have less faith in the team he's assembled, however, and with very good reason. All of that said, this needs to wrap up. I mean, this is not this is not brain surgery that he's involved in. And you just can't go on and on and on with untethered with an investigation that takes years. Yes, they tried to interfere in our election. And yes, they've been doing it for decades. And yes, it's not just our elections, but elections of free people around the world. And yes, the Chinese are trying to engage in our election this year. It's what they do. By the way, the United States might not be too bad at it either in other places. But the good news is that North Dakota has it together. We have paper ballots that serve as a backstop to any type of cyber intervention in our election process. So I think we're especially prepared and blessed right here in North Dakota.
I think there's no more important role for citizens than voting, and there's no important role for government beyond our national defense and our interior defense than making sure that we have elections that work for our country, that are absent of any kind of foreign intervention. This is critical that we get to the bottom of it. People who want to say, rush, 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 I think it's more important that we do a good job instead of a fast job.
Well, it's far too late to do a fast job.
Thank you.
Congressman Cramer, that wouldn't be true.
It's true.
All right. Thank you. Our fifth question comes from Cecile, and Congressman, you'll go first.
The President has called the press the enemy of the people. How concerned are you about the erosion of trust in the press as an institution, and what responsibility does Congress have to censure the President's continued attacks on freedom of the press?
Now, I never thought I'd hear a serious journalist suggest that we censor the President's speech. We have elections to determine those kinds of things. Am I concerned? I am very concerned about it. And I think we all have a responsibility in restoring the dignity and the integrity of the press. I think there are lots of issues beyond the press's bias or perceived bias by certain politicians, Cecile. I think our biggest problem is that the media, the mediums of the media are vastly different. 24-hour television, talk radio, the blogosphere. There's so many competitors for traditional press that I see, for example, newspapers at a great disadvantage in many cases in the marketplace. I don't think Congress has a responsibility to censor the President. We have three co-equal branches of government. We have a responsibility to oversee the presidency, the executive branch, and vice versa, but we shouldn't censor the President.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify. The word was censure, not censor. Censure.
I understand.
15 seconds to respond. Okay.
My point is made.
Very well. Senator.
It's amazing that our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, already recognized how critically important a free press is to the democracy that we have. You have an obligation in the press to be responsible, to do the right thing, to report things without a bias, unobjectively. Now, too often, a subjective opinion infiltrates, and that somehow makes the press, I think, weaker. But it doesn't make them targets for unspeakable kinds of attacks. We've seen this today in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, basically Saudi Arabia killing an American journalist, an American a person who lives in America. That is the consequence of discussions about free press and not being able to express your opinion. It's ironic that his last op-ed piece that was published today in the Washington Post talked about how important it is for the future of his country to promote a free press.
Thank you. Congressman.
I don't think this president has, while he attacks your integrity and while he attacks your biases, and I say you, I mean you in general, he has every right to do that every bit as much as you have a right to write any way you want, as biased or unbiased, fair or unfair as you write it. But this president has a way of communicating, and he's found a way to go around the traditional press. And frankly, I appreciate an accessible president that sometimes misspeaks in at least speaking frankly, directly to the American people. So you don't have to like it, but I appreciate his bluntness, frankly.
Thank you. A question from Owen. And Senator, you'll begin.
What is more important, doing what the majority of North Dakotans want, or doing what you believe is right?
Well, this has certainly been a question that I've been asked a lot of times since my vote to not confirm Judge Kavanaugh. And frequently I get asked by journalists, public opinion polls say that 60% of the public wanted him confirmed. And that may be true. I'm not going to dispute that. That wasn't our numbers. But I will tell you this. When you're a United States Senator, you're elected to exercise your judgment, your best path forward. And when I looked at a Supreme Court appointment, that Supreme Court appointment is probably, that person's going to be sitting on the bench when you are in your 40s and 50s. I can't make a decision based on what the public opinion poll says today. I have to make a decision exercising my independent judgment. And with a Supreme Court Court nominee, guess what? There's no do-overs. It's not like legislation where we can fix it. And so, I think it's really important many times to represent your constituency, but it's equally important to exercise the judgment that God gave you to advance the interest of the state.
I think it's entirely possible from time to time for a person's personal conscience to be in conflict with the majority of the people that you represent. At that point, you have to make the decision. I understand that conflict. But let's be clear. Being wrong, being independent is an excuse for being wrong. Brett Kavanaugh is a really good judge and Supreme Court justice for North Dakota. That's why a vast majority of North Dakotans wanted him. He's strong on Second Amendment rights. He's very strong on rolling back EPA regulations. He's written numerous opinions, both in the majority as well as dissenting opinions, that have become the majority opinion in the United States Supreme Court to the benefit of North Dakota and jobs and North Dakota's economy. And as far as the hearings went, I think the whole world got to see what mob rule would look like. And so we're fortunate that Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed even without one of our senators voting for him.
I think it's important to, especially for young people, to understand that you're going to have to make choices in life that won't always be popular. But you have to look at doing the right thing as you see it. And so to set an example of always following the herd 100%, I'm going to vote with that person. Congressman Cramer announced his commitment to the appointee without even knowing who it is. It's really important, number one, you do your job, and number two, you do your job with the kind of integrity that you make the right choices so you can look at yourself in the mirror in the future and know that you did the right thing.
Thank you. A question from Steve, and Congressman, you'll go first.
Well, this has been an expensive campaign, and you have both used campaign ads that have brought complaints from each other about inaccuracy. Which ad on your opponent's behalf do you feel is the most disingenuous, and why?
Well, Steve, this wasn't on her behalf. This is her ad where she states with her disclaimer that as a state official, as a state employee, I raised my own salary. That is blatantly false. It is known to be false. A former attorney general who had pay raises and a tax commissioner who had pay raises when she was a public official knows it's not true. PolitiFact interviewed Office of Management and Budget personnel, PSC personnel. Not only did we not give ourselves a raise, nor can we give ourselves a raise, we didn't even request a raise. So it's a blatant lie, and it should be taken down right now if we're going to maintain the integrity of public office.
I think the ad that was most hurtful to me, honestly, was any of the ads that talk about how I don't support veterans. I think everybody all the veteran service groups, all of the people who visit the VA, all of the friends that I have that are in those organizations know better. They know that my commitment is the same commitment my father taught me in the VFW that he built, which is that you honor people who put on a uniform, that you give them the benefits, you make them whole in terms of what they need to have going forward as they have earned those benefits. And so for me, I think any ad that says I don't support veterans, that I haven't supported veteran funding, that I haven't been innovative in terms of the choice program, those are the most hurtful to me because I have so much respect for North Dakota's veterans and veterans across the country.
Well, all I would say in response to that, Steve, is thank God Donald Trump came along and actually provided additional benefits to both our military personnel and our veterans. And thank God we were able to pass a bill and he would sign into law the largest pay raise our military has received in nearly 10 years because we had a long drought of supporting our military and veterans during the Democratic administration of Barack Obama, with whom Senator Heitkamp voted 90% of the time.
Thank you. A question from Cecile with Senator Heitkamp to begin.
President Trump has said he favors privatizing the U.S. Postal Service and selling it to a private corporation. Do you support privatization? If not, what's the solution to getting the Postal Service back on its feet?
There is no greater responsibility that I have to North Dakota than the post office. And I know that sounds very odd, and I know the people in the Newspaper Association know about the work that I've been doing to try and improve the service standards on the Postal Service. We have been working tirelessly to make sure that our post office actually functions and can cash flow. We've introduced bills, and this is a great irony that's I've been working with Mark Meadows, who is one of the most conservative members. He and I have paired up. He's from North Carolina. We've paired up to continue to advance a reform for our Postal Service that will buy us time. On privatization, the only thing I can say about that is if you want to eliminate any kind of service standard for rural America, then you privatize the post office, because that's the path forward to eliminating inequality for our rural residents.
It's ironic that she has no higher responsibility than to take care of the men and women in the Postal Service uniform right after a speech about how strong she is for veterans. Look, we all want a good post office. I don't support privatization, Cecile, because that is something that works. Here's the tough part about privatizing, and particularly in a rural community. There's already a lot of privatization of packages being shipped. That creates a difficult competition for the people who get their mail every day that live out in the middle of the country. So we know that the country, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's mail, whether it's roads and highways, that it costs more. We know that. But we also know that you have to have a ubiquitous network of addresses and ways of getting the mail to everybody. We have to find a better way. Privatization, I don't believe, is the solution at all. And I think that I also don't want to take the biggest profit centers away from a post office. Otherwise, we just make it more difficult.
I should clarify, no greater responsibility on the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. It's something that I've been working on since I've been assigned to that committee in the very beginning. I opened up a portal that said fix my mail. I've been working on this day and night, and I find it ironic because I don't find a good partner over in the House of Representatives in fixing our mail here in North Dakota. The partner that I found was from North Carolina, and his name is Mark Meadows, and together I hope we can solve the problem of the post office and get solvency back and get services standards back where they are and should be.
Thank you. A question from Owen, with Congressman Cramer to go first.
Do you believe the Supreme Court made the right decision in upholding North Dakota's voter ID law?
Yeah, thanks, Owen. When you say, did the Supreme Court make the right decision, that's always a difficult question to ask somebody who's not on the Supreme Court. I can say from a policy standpoint, first of all, it was a 6-2 decision, with one, of course, I'm not voting as Brett Kavanaugh. And it was also upholding an appellate court decision. I think that, getting back to one of our earlier questions, the integrity of the ballot box is very precious, and we need to guard it, we need to protect it. North Dakota, being the only state in the country that doesn't have voter registration, makes that much more difficult. I think that the law that the legislature passed was pretty basic. In fact, it provides for tribal members, for example, to actually use their tribal membership card, appropriate, provided by their government, as one part of the ID piece. And so I think you should be able to demonstrate that you live where you're voting. Otherwise, you may end up voting for the wrong person in the wrong place. So we need integrity, but we also need to make sure that we don't disenfranchise. And I think that law does it. As far as the Supreme Court decision, I wouldn't want to judge, what they did.
Thank you, Congressman.
This mess started with the North Dakota legislature when they decided there's certain people in North Dakota that they don't want to vote. Everyone knows that tribal IDs have a very difficult time getting a residential address. And so as a result of that challenge, they write this as if people don't know each other in North Dakota. The other unintended consequences of this is if you're a senior citizen and you don't have an ID, even though you may have lived in the community for 70 years and you know everybody at the ballot place, you can't vote because you don't have a piece of paper. That's not North Dakota. It's not the way we do things in North Dakota. It's not the way we should do things in North Dakota. This litigation is still ongoing. The only thing the appellate court did was refuse to stay to lift the stay on the opinion, or to make sure that the opinion that was written by the district court judge is stayed, which means that it's not enforced. Our district court judge did the right thing and ruled that this was an inappropriate infringement on voting rights. The Supreme Court basically reaffirmed what the circuit court did. This litigation will be ongoing and will be argued in the 8th Circuit. And I hope that Native American veterans get an opportunity to vote because they put on a uniform and they earned that opportunity.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
And they do get to vote, Senator. That's the point. The standard for voting in North Dakota is the easiest of anywhere in the country. We are the only state that does not have voter registration. The legislature did not say, gee, we don't want these people to vote. Let's come up with a law that keeps them from voting. The standard is the same for all people. All people, regardless of race, creed, color. Identity politics has got to stop, and it's got to stop now, or we're going to be going down this path forever.
A question from Steve, and Senator, you'll answer first.
North Dakota's economy relies heavily on oil and coal development. Given that, what should the United States do to deal with global climate change?
One of the most critical issues that we have is keeping our coal industry viable. We know right now, without regulatory certainty, without the ability to meet environmental standards, we won't get our coal jobs in the long term. And so one of the things I'm most proud of is the work that I've done on carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization. It's a way to basically take facilities like cement plants, like coal plants, you capture the carbon, you sequester it. That is an absolute necessary technological development in order to meet CO2 standards globally. And so we are hoping that North Dakota can be that place with that innovation, either Project Tundra or going forward with projects like we have at Great Plains coal gasification. This is the future for our coal industry, but also the future of tackling the problem of CO2 emissions.
You know, when I represented candidate Donald Trump as his energy advisor and his surrogate on these issues, I debated Hillary Clinton's energy advisor twice, once at law school in Richmond, Virginia, and once in California at a natural gas executives meeting. And I think one of the things that I always say about climate change and solving climate change, and whether or not you even believe it, doesn't matter. The country wants us to. The innovation to do it is right here in North Dakota. We have the products, we have the commodities, we have the incentive to do it. What we can't do is have any more policies like Hillary Clinton wanted to have and Barack Obama had that kill the innovators who would find the bridge from today's coal to tomorrow's clean technologies. We're on the brink of it. Certainly 45Q that Senator Heitkamp is talking about is an important piece of that, but we need to expand it. Right now it's only useful to one company in Texas, and we've been working with the administration as well as our legislative colleagues to make carbon capture, utilization, and storage credits much more useful to North Dakota. We have coal, we have oil, we have opportunity, and we have the innovators right here.
It's interesting, Congressman Cramer keeps talking about a bill that I led that no one thought we could get done, which is 45Q, which provides those all-important tax credits. He said nobody else can use them except this plant. It's interesting because he keeps talking about what additional add-ons. If he has all that power of persuading people in the White House and in Congress, why was I able to get a major piece of legislation that tackles the problem of climate, but also tackles the problem of keeping our coal jobs? Why was I able to get that done when he wasn't?
Except you didn't. You helped a company in Texas, Senator.
Please.
We're talking about North Dakota tonight.
Right. Thank you. We have a question from Cecile, and Congressman Cramer, you'll answer first.
It's estimated 1 in 4 women will become victims of sexual assault in their lifetimes. The Me Too movement has stirred emotional memories for many. Going forward, how can government better balance the presumption of innocence for the accused with the need to assure future victims they will be heard and treated with respect?
Excellent question and a very important balance to find. I'm not sure government's capable of doing it, Cecile, but we all ought to be part of the solution. This is a cultural issue. I think it deals a lot with our law enforcement. It can deal a lot with how we train employers, HR officials to make it more comfortable for women to come forward, particularly as soon as possible after something will have happened, so that they feel safe. Because what we don't want to do is create, in my mind, something that actually is counterproductive to the goal of helping women feel comfortable and safe coming forward much sooner. And I don't want to oversimplify it. I'm not a woman. I've not been sexually assaulted. I don't know. But I know we can do a lot better job. But it's not just a government problem. What we can't have are these big movements that become political movements that undercut actually the integrity of the goal of helping people feel comfortable coming forward. And also, that diminishes those 1 in 4. That diminishes the experience of the 1 in 4.
Thank you.
I think it's clear from everything that's happened, beginning with the Me Too movement and now the discussion that we're having about sexual assault, that this is, number one, way underreported. It is way under investigated, and it's way under prosecuted. And many women who have contacted my office have told me over and over again that if they did report it, they wish they hadn't. And when they did report it, when they didn't report it, they knew that it would bother them the rest of their life because they didn't get justice. It is time for us to quit talking across party lines and start working together to develop a world where women feel safe, where children feel safe, where we all can accept and believe that we cannot tolerate this kind of behavior, and that we must stand together against sexual assault and sexual violence.
While, as you stated, making sure that we maintain the due process that's afforded, that's guaranteed to people who are accused. One of the things I think, and this is just one idea, I'd like to see a lot more female police officers. I think we need to have first responders, for example. We need to have people on the street, as well as in our schools, as well as in the workplace, that have an inviting demeanor about all of this. We need to make it more comfortable for that 1 in 4 to come forward and come forward sooner. Thank you.
A question from Owen, and Senator Heitkamp to answer first.
As a senator, how will you help to restore respectful political debate?
I think in many ways I already have. I ran 6 years ago and I said, I'm not joining any team. I'm not 100% with anyone other than North Dakota. And I've been able to work across party lines and achieve some pretty extraordinary things, whether it is lifting the oil ban, 40-year oil ban on oil exports, whether it's 45Q, which Congressman Cramer undermines, but it is an absolute centerpiece of what we need to do with carbon capture, or whether it is getting regulatory relief. You don't do that by just being with one team. You don't do that by speaking in sound bites and in political kind of talk. You do it by sitting down and listening and understanding. And so I think that the future has to be with people who are moderate. People who aren't going like Congressman Cramer 100% of the time with one party, and people who are willing to listen to both sides of the argument and fashion a solution.
You know, Senator Heitkamp keeps creating this illusion that somehow she's bipartisan, except on the things that really matter. She was with Barack Obama nearly 90% of the time. And then she's proud of the fact she's been with President Trump about half of the time, maybe as much as 54% of the time. The problem is, you can be on both teams and you maybe feel good about it, but when one team is so much better for North Dakota than the other team, you don't abandon that good team half the time just to say that you're only with them half the time. Donald Trump stands with North Dakota more often than Heidi Heitkamp stands with North Dakota. He supported tax cuts. He supported a replacement of Obamacare. He supports cutting sanctuary city funding. He supports a strong military. He supports strong veterans. He supports the rollback of regulations. He supports the REINS Act. He's on the right side of North Dakota. That's what matters. It's not how often you're with this team, or how often you're with both teams. The only thing that matters is how often are you with the people of North Dakota. That's my standard, not what color the other team wears.
I think it's interesting that Congressman Cramer talks about President Trump. Why not talk about what you've done? Why not talk about your accomplishments? Why not talk about your bipartisan credibility? Because when you look at rankings, no matter what he says, I am 50th most conservative and 49th most liberal. And political thought right now is like a dumbbell. There's hard right and hard left. Congressman Cramer is going to be on the hard right. There's connective tissue in between that stops gridlock, and that's the moderates, like me, who try and get things done and do get things done.
Thank you. A question from Steve, with Congressman Cramer to start.
Speaking of President Trump, do you support his proposal for a border wall with Mexico? What changes to the country's immigration system would you support?
Wow, can we extend these to like 5-minute answers? Because I suspect Heidi and I both could go a long time on this. I do support the border wall, along with the bill that I just co-sponsored this week that includes entire border security. And when we see the caravan that's coming from Central America as we speak, it's all the more important. But that needs to include the wall where appropriate, which is a good part of the area, appropriate UAVs, manned aerial aircraft, vessels, the National Guard, more processing at the border. But we have a lot to do on the legal side as well. We aren't treating our legal immigrants properly, especially those that are providing the type of jobs and skills and training that we need to grow our economy. This is a complex issue, but yes, I support the wall.
Senator Hoeven and I both worked very hard to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill. It passed with an overwhelming majority in the Senate. The House refused to take it up. This problem could have been solved in 2013. So we missed that opportunity. I look at border security as a law enforcement issue. And I will tell you, I will never, ever allow a serious offender to be released from a local jail without ICE being called and without ICE being able to apprehend that individual. If they've committed a serious crime, they need to go to jail and they need to be deported. My record is clear on border security. I've spent a tremendous amount of time on the southern border. I have the support of the Border Patrol agents. I have the support of the border sheriffs. I have the support of the border ranchers. And I was instrumental in getting a northern border strategy adopted by the Department of Homeland Security. All of that is about law enforcement. As your former Attorney General, I understand this. I understand how critical cross-jurisdiction enforcement is. We need to do everything we can to secure that border. And I'll tell you right now, it's not secure because I've been there, I've seen it, and I've worked with the people of Border Patrol to try and fix it.
Thank you.
But you supported amnesty for 11 million people who are here illegally. You say that we need ICE to take care of the criminals. Being here illegally is against the law. That's why they call it illegal. They've already broken the law by coming here illegally. Sanctuary cities harbor illegal people. People are here illegally breaking the law. You support sanctuary cities. You can't have it both ways. And by the way, Steve, I think it's important for people to understand that nearly half of the people who are here illegally didn't cross the southern border. They overstayed a visa. We have lots of issues that are certainly the border's a big one, but we have many issues that complicate it even beyond that.
Thank you. A question from Cecile with Senator Heitkamp to begin.
You both came out on opposing sides of the fiercely bitter process to confirm Justice Brett Kavanaugh. What should be done, if anything, to ensure future confirmations are done with more collegiality?
Yeah, I just want to respond very quickly to the gave amnesty. If I gave amnesty, so did Senator Hoeven, because the bill he's talking about, we both worked to get passed through the Senate. We've talked a lot about Brett Kavanaugh, but we haven't talked about the failed and horrible process. And I think one area that Congressman Cramer and I can both agree on is this process was failure on the part of the Judiciary Committee. It was failure on the part of the Senate as we proceeded. It did not look good and was not good. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that our Judiciary Committee is conducting itself appropriately and fairly. I don't care if it's the majority or the minority. This process created a scene in Washington, D.C. and across the country that was inappropriate. it was unseemly, and it was not becoming of either the Senate or the Supreme Court. And I hope that we all take a step backwards and think about how we're going to fix that, because we cannot go through another confirmation process like this and still maintain the integrity of the United States Supreme Court.
Yes, Cecile, the process was like every other process. The difference was the behavior of one party in the process that created the spectacle. Hearings were held. More questions were answered by Brett Kavanaugh, written questions, than all the previous Supreme Court nominees added up. He's had 6 background checks, FBI background checks, up to this point. The process was hijacked by a mob whose only issue is to continue to allow abortion on demand. And to do that, they would do anything. They stated it in advance. Chuck Schumer stated in advance, we must do anything to stop this nominee from being confirmed. So they did a 7th FBI investigation. Thank God that Charles Grassley, the chairman of the committee, provided that extra time. He provided calm. They maintained their decorum on the Republican side. So the process isn't the issue so much as the players in the process. My hope is that the scene was so ugly and the outcome so bad for the process that people have bounced off the bottom and will come back to their senses now, and we can have the type of decorum that you're speaking of.
Thank you.
Well, there is equal blame to go around, contrary to what Congressman Cramer says. Let me tell you, when we reviewed the final investigation, we had to go into a secured area. Senator Grassley, instead of making 17 copies for the 17 senators who were in there, we had 1 copy that we passed around. Think of how crazy that is. And this was, in fact, punitive, and it was done to limit our ability to review those documents. There was plenty wrong with this process on both sides. And the problem is Congressman Cramer always looks for the Democrats doing the wrong thing. Sometimes I think the Republicans do the wrong thing, and we need to be able to call it out and make sure that this process is appropriately conducted in the future.
Thank you. Now, comes the time for you each to ask a question. We've allotted up to 1 minute for you to ask that question, and then we'll follow the same format. So we'll start with Congressman Cramer, and I'll start timing when it's time. And then Senator Heitkamp, you'll have 1 minute, and then you'll have 30 seconds to respond to her answer. So with that said, go ahead.
Well, I've actually, this question was asked in a different way, but I still want to get to what you're thinking, Senator Heitkamp. When you authorized the ad saying that I voted a $23,000 raise for myself, that I gave myself a raise. You know that's not true. You know that's impossible. You know that's against the rules. You know if you looked at the Public Service Commission, in fact, we have some of them here, staff, and asked them that we didn't even put in for a raise in our budgets over the many years, by the way, 10 years that I served on the Public Service Commission. Why would you run an ad like that, which you have to know as a former Attorney General is blatantly untrue?
I think it's important that everybody recognize that in your budget is your salary. In the request for the salary, you didn't go down to the legislature and say, wait a minute, when I was elected, this was the salary for the job that I had. Please don't give me additional money. I never did that when I was Attorney General. I made sure, in fact, my salary was only raised in the next term. And so I think it's inappropriate during any term that you're elected for, and you have 6-year terms on the Public Service Commission, that you get a salary increase. You were elected with that salary. You should maintain that salary, and it should only be increased when that salary is, in fact, part of the next term.
30 seconds to respond.
That answer was so goofy, I should almost give you my 30 seconds to say it again. Did you listen to yourself?
Yeah, I did.
Not only was it not in what we requested, when it goes to the legislature, that is the salary range for every state employee. It's at the most, it's the cost of living increase. Yeah, I could give it away, and who knows, I maybe do. I don't know. I don't announce those sorts of things. But to somehow suggest you should run down there and say, no, don't give this pay raise. I'm so noble that I wouldn't take it. You always took your pay raise, the senator. With all due respect, you always took them.
Thank you, Congressman.
I'm going to use my minute to say, number one, pay increases are a indicator of how self-interested you are in the job that you're doing. And so I'm going to ask my question. You have Mitch McConnell, who's going to cut Social Security and Medicare. And today you said, or yesterday you said, that's courageous. Cutting Medicare and Social Security is courageous. And you also said, in a rare moment where you disagreed with the president, you said you disagree with the president in cutting, when he says no cuts to Social Security and Medicare. How can our seniors trust that you are going to protect when you are constantly going to support individuals like Mitch McConnell and like Paul Ryan, who will cut our Social Security and Medicare?
Says the woman who supports Chuck Schumer. Listen, I am not afraid to confess out loud that if we don't deal with Medicare and Social Security, it won't be there for our seniors. And it certainly won't be there for future generations. Because under your plan of doing nothing, guess what happens when it goes insolvent? In 8 years, Medicare, 16 years, Social Security. Social Security, at that point, has an automatic 25% cut in benefits. I've never talked about cutting Social Security or Medicare. I've only talked about reforming them in a way that allows more revenue in, so that we do something today that affects the out years of 10, 15, 20 years from now, that cuts nothing in Social Security, affects no current seniors, affects no seniors that will be on the program within 10 years, but that does secure it not only for today's seniors, not only for tomorrow's seniors, but for my children and my grandchildren. We owe that to, for the person who wants to have bipartisan discussions and listening, you notice it's all off the table. It's all off the table. Thank you. I think we should have a discussion about this, or we're never going to solve the problem until it's too late.
That was the most amazing piece of political double talk I've ever heard. I've never talked about cutting it, but we need to cut it to make it solvent. But we're not going to hurt this current seniors. So let's get real. We know that the plan all along was to cut Social Security and cut Medicare, and it was done because we have a party that never believed in Medicare, that never believed in these programs, and they continue to believe that our seniors should live in poverty instead of getting the money that they've earned. When you call these programs entitlement programs, it's an insult to every senior citizen who earns those benefits.
Thank you. Thank you. So, here we are, to the end. Each have 2 minutes for closing statements, starting with Congressman Cramer.
Well, again, thank you, Corey. Thank you, panelists. Thanks, North Dakota Newspaper Association, and all of you for your involvement in this and for your interest in democracy. A free society only works if you're involved, for sure. So thank you for being involved and caring enough. You know, you've seen a spirited, but I think a fair debate tonight. But let me tell you something about one other major difference between Senator Heitkamp and me. I will talk about the tough issues. I don't pretend that they're going to solve themselves if we don't do something. That's why for the last 6 years, as North Dakota's only member of a body of 435 called the People's House, I've had a 6-year personal discussion with you. It's why I have the most town halls of any member of Congress. It's why I do 200 talk radio shows every year with unscreened calls. It's why I speak plainly and clearly. It's why I go into the community. It's why I rarely do roundtables with only my invited guests. Because you don't learn anything only talking to yourself around a table. I believe it's some of those discussions that has caused Senator Heitkamp to lose her way lately. Because you talk to the same 4 or 5 people every day and you start thinking that this ad with listing a whole bunch of people makes all the sense in the world. Certainly every one of them would want to be in my ad supporting me. It only makes sense. And if you disagree, guess what her spokesperson says? You're an idiot. That's not the way we have a family discussion in North Dakota. So thank you. This is why with the millions, even tens of millions of dollars being thrown at me in attack ads by Chuck Schumer and Senator Heitkamp and all of her other allies, it's why this relationship is the one that matters. This relationship is why I get the benefit of the doubt, even with all the 30-second mud flying at your television screen. So thanks for the great honor of letting me be your member of the People's House, and thank you for the honor of being so accessible to me as I set out to represent you. God bless you.
Before I begin my statement, I think it's interesting that Congressman Cramer has refused over and over in this campaign debates, even at Fox National News. Now he's telling us how accessible he is and how much he wants to have a conversation.
You skipped this one the first time, Senator. You skipped this one the first time.
Let's just be honest.
Please.
And so over the last 6 years, I have met with thousands of North Dakotans. I've been engaging with many, many people, and I remind them that 6 years ago, I said, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I am going to do everything that I can to hopefully change the culture and to work across the aisle to actually benefit the people of my great state. I think I've done that. And how I know how that works is I grew up in a small town, a town of 90 people. In every small town in America, there's a table at lunchtime. And that table is full of people. They don't always agree. And they may argue politics, and there may be Democrats, probably more Republicans, at that table in North Dakota. But they figure out how to put up the Christmas lights. They figure out how to make a difference by buying the fire truck. They figure out how to fix the roof on the church. They don't always agree, but they get the job done because they know how to talk to each other and they know how to be respectful. We've been extraordinarily, I think, successful with major pieces of legislation like bank deregulation for small community banks, like opening up the oil export market, like 45Q, like doing things for our Native American community, like the Commission on the Status of Native American Children. These are all successes that I am so enormously proud of, but the reason why I was able to do that is because I bring North Dakota common sense and North Dakota compromise to the Washington, D.C., which they need more of. They don't need another person to vote with one side 100% of the time. They need people who are going to work across the aisle to get the job done. And that's what North Dakota needs, and that's what I'm going to bring if I'm offered a second term in the United States Senate.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you to the North Dakota Newspaper Association, to Forum Communications, American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, Bismarck State College and Bismarck Schools Career Academy, and especially thank you to the candidates for coming here tonight to helping North Dakota voters better understand your stance on the issues, as well as your position and your passion for that position. And most important, please, North Dakotans, be sure to vote on November 6th. Thank you very much.
With the midterm elections just days away, watch the competition for the control of Congress on C-SPAN. See for yourself the candidates and the debates from key House and Senate races. Make C-SPAN your primary source for campaign 2018.
Tomorrow, a debate in the race for the U.S. Senate seat in Massachusetts between incumbent Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren and Republican challenger Jeff Deal, a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Live coverage starts at 7 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. With 17 days until the election, make C-SPAN your primary source for campaign 2018.
Now, a debate in the U.S. Senate race in Washington between incumbent Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell and Republican challenger Susan Hutchison, a former TV journalist. This is about an hour.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Lair Student Center at Spokane Community College and the second and final debate in the 2018 race for U.S. Senate. I'm Haley Gunn.